Somewhere, right now, there is a version of you who wakes up at the same time every single day, not because it feels good, but because it is who they decided to be. That version of you exists. The only question is whether you are going to meet them or spend another year explaining to yourself why today wasn't the day. You already know this. You've known it for a long time, and that's the part that stings the most. There is a single habit, so small it seems almost insulting to mention, that nearly every disciplined person in history practiced without exception, and almost no one talks about why it worked. It isn't waking up early, it isn't cold showers, it isn't some elaborate morning ritual you saw online. It's something quieter than that, something the Stoics understood 2,000 years before the word productivity ever existed. We'll get there, but first, we need to talk about why discipline keeps failing you, and it isn't for the reason you think. Let's start with an uncomfortable fact. You have tried to change before. You've made the plan, bought the notebook, downloaded the app, told a friend about your new routine so you'd feel accountable. And for a while, it worked. 3 days, maybe 2 weeks if you were lucky. And then, quietly, without any dramatic collapse, you just stopped. This has probably happened to you more than once. It isn't because you are weak. It isn't because you lack willpower, whatever that word even means anymore. It's because you are relying on the wrong fuel entirely. Motivation is a feeling. And feelings, by their very nature, are temporary. They rise, they peak, and then they fade, usually faster than we'd like to admit. If your discipline depends on how you feel in a given moment, you have built your entire structure on sand. The Stoics knew this intimately. Marcus Aurelius, a man who ruled an empire and buried his own children, who fought wars on the frontier while plague swept through Rome, did not wait to feel like getting up before dawn. He wrote to himself, in the privacy of a journal never meant for anyone else's eyes, that at first light, when reluctance takes hold, he should remind himself he was rising to do the work of a human being, not because it felt good, because it was who he had decided to be. Pay attention to this, because it changes everything that follows. Discipline is not a feeling you summon. Discipline is a decision you make once, and then defend, again and again, especially on the days you don't want to. Here's something that might be hard to hear. The reason most people fail at building discipline isn't that their goals are too small. It's that their first steps are too big. You've seen it before. Someone decides to change their life, and within a week, they've committed to running 5 miles a day, eating perfectly, waking at 5, meditating for an hour, and reading a book a week, all starting Monday. And by Thursday, the whole structure has collapsed under its own weight, and they're left feeling worse than before they started, because now failure has a story attached to it. Now it's evidence. Now it's proof. The Stoics were suspicious of grand gestures. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism itself, understood something that modern psychology would take centuries to prove, with data. Well-being, he said, is realized by small steps, but is truly no small thing. He wasn't being poetic. He was describing the actual mechanics of how a human character is built, not in leaps, in repetitions. But here's the part most people miss. The small step isn't a lesser version of the big change. It is the only version of change that has ever actually worked for anyone in the history of human behavior. The dramatic transformation you're picturing, the one where you become a completely different person overnight, has never once happened to a real human being. It happens in movies, where the editor simply cuts to the result. In real life, there is no cut. There is only the footage of you Showing up one ordinary morning at a time, doing something so small it barely feels worth mentioning. You are not failing because your ambition is too small. You are failing because your first step is bigger than your current identity can carry. This next part is the hinge on which everything else turns. So, slow down here with me for a moment. Most people think discipline works like this. You do the hard thing, and eventually, after enough repetitions, you become a disciplined person. That's not wrong exactly, but it has the order slightly reversed, and that reversal is why so many habits don't survive contact with a bad week. The more accurate sequence is this. You decide, quietly and privately, who you are choosing to become. And then your actions are simply evidence, presented to yourself, that the decision is real. Epictetus, who spent part of his life enslaved, with no control over his body, his location, or his circumstances, still insisted that the one thing no one could touch was the will. He told his students to first decide what kind of person they wanted to be, and only then to act accordingly in whatever they were doing, not the other way around. The identity comes first. The behavior follows as proof. This is where everything changes. When you skip your morning routine, you are not just missing a workout or a page of reading. You are casting a vote, a quiet, invisible vote for the version of yourself who doesn't follow through. And when you show up anyway, especially when it would be easier not to, you are casting a vote for the version who does. No single vote decides the election, but the pattern of votes over months and years becomes something close to unbreakable. It becomes character. This is why the people who seem effortlessly disciplined aren't actually relying on willpower in the moment. They made the decision a long time ago. What you're watching now is just the echo of that decision repeating itself daily, almost automatically. We need to talk honestly about comfort because comfort has a way of disguising itself as rest, as self-care, as simply being reasonable. There is a difference between rest that restores you and comfort that quietly erodes you. Rest has a shape. It has a beginning and an end. It leaves you sharper afterward. Comfort, the kind that becomes a daily habit of avoidance, doesn't restore anything. It just delays the discomfort you were trying to avoid and adds interest to the debt. Seneca, one of the wealthiest men in Rome, deliberately practiced poverty. For a set number of days, he would eat the simplest food, wear rough clothing, and sleep without comfort. Not because he had to, but so that comfort would never again have power over his decisions. He wanted to know, from direct experience, that he could lose everything and still be fine. That knowledge, once earned, changes how a person moves through the world. Fear of discomfort stops being a leash. And this is why it matters. Every time you choose the easier option instead of the harder one, the snooze button instead of the alarm, the scroll instead of the page, the excuse instead of the effort, you are not just losing that one moment. You are training your nervous system to believe that discomfort is dangerous and should be avoided at nearly any cost. And your brain, being an efficient machine, will hold you to that lesson the next time discomfort appears, which will be almost immediately, because discomfort is simply what growth feels like from the inside. The goal is not to enjoy discomfort. Most disciplined people don't particularly enjoy the cold, the early hour, the difficult conversation. The goal is to stop being controlled by the instinct to avoid it. There is a version of you on the other side of that shift who is not fighting yourself every single morning. That version is not motivated. That version is simply no longer negotiating. Let's address something practical now, because philosophy without practice is just decoration. Willpower is a limited resource. This is not a metaphor. It is close to a measurable fact of human psychology. Every decision you make throughout the day draws from the same reserve, and by evening, that reserve is thin. This is why the person who swears they'll go to the gym after work almost never goes. It's not that their commitment was fake. It's that they scheduled their discipline for the exact hour their willpower is at its lowest. The Stoics, long before anyone had language for decision fatigue, understood the value of structure over spontaneity. Marcus Aurelius didn't decide each morning whether he felt like rising early. He had already decided long before, and the morning was simply the execution of a choice made once. This is the quiet secret behind almost every disciplined person you've ever admired. They removed the decision. They built a system, a routine, a fixed sequence of actions that doesn't require willpower to activate because it has become closer to instinct than choice. But here's the part most people miss. You don't need more motivation. You need fewer decisions. If your habit depends on deciding in the moment whether you feel like doing it, you have already lost most of the battle before you've begun. But if the habit is simply what happens at that hour, in that place, in that order, the way brushing your teeth simply happens without negotiation, then willpower becomes almost irrelevant. You're not fighting yourself anymore. You're just following a path you already carved. Build the structure when your mind is clear and your resolve is strong. Then let the structure carry you through the hours when your resolve is weak. That is not cheating. That is the entire point. Here is something worth sitting with, because it separates real discipline from performance. Almost anyone can be disciplined when someone is watching. The gym is full of people who show up consistently because they've told everyone they're going. And the social cost of stopping feels higher than the discomfort of continuing. There's nothing wrong with that. But it isn't yet the deepest form of discipline. The deepest form happens in the room with no witnesses. At the hour no one would ever check. Doing the thing you said you'd do, entirely for your own sake. Marcus Aurelius wrote his Meditations for no audience at all. 12 books of private struggle, written not because he had already become wise, but because he was still fighting to become so every single day, with no one to impress and nothing to prove. That is perhaps the most honest document discipline has ever produced, because it was never meant to be seen. This is where everything changes, again, in a deeper way this time. The question that actually matters isn't whether you can perform discipline when it's visible. It's whether you still choose it when it's invisible, when no one would know if you skipped it. When there's no audience, no accountability partner, no post to make about it afterward. That is where character actually lives, not in the version of you that exists for others, but in the version that exists when the room is empty and the only person keeping score is you. This is uncomfortable to hear because most of us, if we're honest, perform discipline more than we practice it. We want the identity without doing the quiet, unglamorous, unseen repetition that actually builds it. But the Stoics would tell you, gently and without cruelty, that the unseen moment is the only one that counts. There is a thought the Stoics carried with them everywhere, one that modern life tends to avoid almost entirely. Memento mori. Remember, you will die. It sounds heavy, maybe even morbid, until you understand what it was actually for. It wasn't meant to frighten. It was meant to clarify. Because most people postpone discipline the way they postpone everything difficult, quietly assuming there will always be another Monday, another new year, another clean slate waiting somewhere in the future. And there usually is. until one day, without warning, there isn't. Seneca wrote that the person who puts the finishing touches on their life each day is never short of time. He didn't mean this literally, as though every day should end with your affairs perfectly settled. He meant that urgency, real urgency, is the antidote to the slow drift most people call their life. The habit you keep postponing is not neutral. Every day you delay it is a day spent permanently on the version of you that hasn't changed yet. Pay attention to this, because it's easy to let slide past. You do not need to fear death to benefit from remembering it. You only need to let it strip away the illusion that you have unlimited time to become who you're capable of becoming. The habit you'll start eventually is not actually being saved for later. It's being lost one ordinary day at a time to a version of you that no longer needs to justify its own stagnation because there's always tomorrow. Except, of course, there isn't always tomorrow. There's only ever today repeated until one day it stops repeating. Now we need to talk about something almost no one addresses honestly, and it might be the most important part of this entire discussion. You will break the streak, not might, will. There will be a morning you sleep through the alarm, a week that falls apart because life intervened, a stretch of days where the habit simply didn't happen. This is not a hypothetical. This is guaranteed for every human being who has ever tried to build discipline, including the ones you admire most. The old pattern, the one you're trying to leave behind, treats the broken streak as proof. See? It whispers, you were never really disciplined. You were only pretending. And that single sentence, if you believe it, is often enough to end the entire effort, because shame is a far more effective habit killer than any single missed morning ever was. The Stoics had a different relationship with failure entirely. They didn't treat a single lapse as a referendum on character. Marcus Aurelius, writing to himself after what were surely difficult days, an empire under strain, personal grief, physical illness, never once suggested that a bad day undid the man he had built himself into. He simply returned to the practice the next morning, without ceremony, without excessive self-punishment, and without treating the break as final. And this is why it matters, more than almost anything else in this video. Discipline is not a perfect, unbroken line. It never has been, for anyone. It is a pattern with gaps in it, and the entire skill, the actual discipline, is in how quickly and how gently you return after the gap. Not with punishment, not with a dramatic promise to never fail again, just with the next small action, done quietly, without needing to explain the break to anyone, including yourself. The people you consider disciplined are not the people who never broke their streak. They are the people who broke it 50 times and returned 51. Now, back to what I mentioned at the beginning. The single habit, so small it seems almost insulting, that nearly every disciplined figure in history practiced. It's this. At the end of the day, before sleep, they reviewed it, not with harsh judgment and not with empty self-congratulation either, but with honest, unemotional attention. What did I do well today? Where did I fall short? What will I do differently tomorrow? Seneca described asking himself these exact questions each night, going over his entire day, examining what he had done and said, hiding nothing from himself, because, as he put it, why should he be afraid of any of his shortcomings when he could still say to himself, see that you don't do it again? This tiny practice, 5 minutes, maybe less, is the quiet engine behind almost every other principle in this video. It's how identity gets reinforced without needing an audience. It's how the broken streak gets addressed without shame. It's how the system gets adjusted before small cracks become total collapse. It requires no equipment, no app, no elaborate ritual, just a few honest minutes with yourself at the end of each ordinary day. Most people never build this habit because it doesn't look impressive. There's no before and after photo for quiet, nightly honesty. But this is precisely why it works. It was never meant to be seen by anyone else. It was only ever meant to keep you accountable to the one person you can never actually escape. So, let's return to where we began. Somewhere, there is a version of you who wakes at the same time every day, not from motivation, but from decision. That version was never a fantasy. It was never reserved for people with more time, more willpower, or easier circumstances than you. It is built exactly the way Zeno described it, through small steps that are truly no small thing. You don't need the perfect morning routine. You don't need to become a different person overnight, and you were never going to. What you need is one small, repeatable action, chosen deliberately, defended quietly, and returned to, without shame, every single time you fall away from it. That is the entire practice. That has always been the entire practice. The Stoics did not promise an easy life, and neither will this video. But they did promise something sturdier than ease. A life built by your own hands, one ordinary, unremarkable day at a time, until one morning, without any dramatic turning point at all, you simply look up and realize you have already become the person you spent so long only hoping to be. That person is not waiting for the perfect moment. There isn't one coming. They are waiting for tomorrow morning, at the usual hour, for you to simply show up again.